Alam niyo mga anak, when I woke up on that fateful day, Saturday, February 22, 1986, alam mo, Sabado yun. Hindi ko akalain that participating in a revolt was going to be on my radar screen. I was looking forward to a weekend recuperating from the physical, mental, emotional roller coaster. Now, we Filipinos had been on since the election day on February 7, 2 weeks before. And, preparing myself for, the ongoing battle. Because alam niyo, sabi nga ni Bishop Ambo, no, on February 7, the snap elections were held. Alam niyo, the nation had only given 2 months to prepare, kaya nga snap elections. Within those 2 months, the NAMFREL, the National Movement for Free Elections, managed to bring together 500,000 volunteers. Ganyan katindi. All over the Philippines to watch the election, and secure the ballots, count the votes and secure the ballots. I was one of those volunteers, and 9 of them gave up their lives for the cause. So actually, the NAMFREL are the unsung heroes of that EDSA kasi, they set the stage. I bring this up because it was the NAMFREL parallel count, yung NAMFREL quick count, which were based on electoral return, official election returns, which contained the signatures. It had to contain the signatures of the BEI and the NAMFREL volunteer that was in charge of that precinct. Kung wala yung dalawang signature, hindi mabibilang yan. Kasi ang nangyari, yung walang signature na NAMFREL, dyan nagkaroon ng katakot-takot ng dayaan. Alright? So, it was the NAMFREL parallel count which alerted the country and the world to the Marcos's attempt to steal the elections. Plus, of course, there were reports from the field of violence and goons in the polling places and the courage of the NAMFREL volunteers to protect the ballot boxes. Ayan talagang high sa roller coaster. Remember at the time, there were 15 major daily newspapers, 5 major TV stations, 300 radio stations. Marcos or his cronies controlled most of them. Ang independent lang, yung Radio Veritas, the Catholic Church, the one newspaper, Business Day, which was supposed to be a business newspaper, and one TV station. Isipin nyo lang, ang information control during that campaign, and yet Cory won another high. The parallel count of NAMFREL showed Cory ahead by a comfortable margin. And then the COMELEC count naman sa PICC showed the exact opposite. Under normal circumstances, that would have been the end of Cory. So that was a low in a roller coaster ride. Fortunately for the Philippines, the world was watching. International election observers from the United States and 17 other countries were in the Philippines to observe, and so were a host of international media observers. Kasi nga, 20 years na si Marcos dyan eh. Marcos had no recourse but to allow them in since he had bragged in the American media, na sinabi nga ni Bishop Ambo, that the Philippines was a working democracy. And their story, yung story ng mga foreigners, that was that the guns, goons, and gold were used, but failed to suppress the will of the people. Ayan. Tapos, an even greater blow to the Marcos machine was that 30 computer workers working in the COMELEC count being held in the PICC on February 9, they walked out. Sabi nila, there's vote tampering and manipulation. Naku, mataas na naman kami sa roller coaster. Then on February 11, Evelio Javier, the governor of Antique and a staunch oppositionist, was killed in a public toilet, inside a public toilet near the provincial capital by bodyguards of the local administration leader, Arturo Pacificador. that was a low point kasi talagang in open, everybody saw it. Talagang walang hiya yung mga tao. But that was the low point in our roller coaster ride. And then there was but the diplomatic community was in full attendance at Evelio's funeral, which was a big boost to the anti-dictatorship movement. Tapos, on February 15, Congress, yung Batasang Pambansa, declared Marcos and his running mate, Arturo Tolentino, the president and vice president-elect. In spite of everything, the walkout, the Manfred parallel count, that was the lowest of the low. But Cory Aquino wasn't having any of it. Sabi niya, I was told, she called for her countrymen to a tagumpay ng bayan rally at the Luneta. I was told that her advisors, mostly male, wanted a smaller venue kasi baka konting tao ang pupunta. Nakakahiya. Sabi niya, hindi pwede. She wanted to know if the Filipinos were behind her. Understand, folk, that was all, mostly by word of mouth. Wala tayong mga cellphones, wala tayong ganon. When we were saying, you go to Luneta, ayon, word of mouth lang yon. No cell phones, no computers, no iPads. Alalahanin natin yan. And so I went to Luneta by the LRT. That was the first time I rode the LRT or MRT basta. And my heart was in my mouth kasi I did not know what to expect. But I was going basta. Ganon yan. Well, apparently 2 million other people had exactly the same idea as me. To give you an idea what the size of 2 million would mean today. At end of 1985, ang population Filipinas 54 million people. 2 million were in EDSA. So if that happened today, the crowd would reach more than 4 million people. That was the Filipinos showing their support. They did not know what was in store for them there. But sabi kasi ni Cory, punta kayo dyan, tagumpay natin yan. We went. And that is when I realized that we could and would win our country back. Big high on the roller coaster. Tapos sabi ni Cory sa amin, we were to boycott all Marcos crony establishments and there would be nationwide civil disobedience. So there I was, February 22, resting after planning as we're all Filipinos for the battle ahead. You understand, mga kapuso, excuse me, mga anak, we were primed. And I thought it would be a long drawn out war. I wasn't even listening to the radio. Some NAMFREL volunteers, Lea Navarro and Tony and Javi Claparols, came to the house and we were talking leisurely about what we are going to do about the boycott, about possible plans. But, chika lang. Then I got a call from Cheche Lazaro, a woman. She wanted me to find out, to check the Enrile house. He lives in front of us kasi to find out if there was any activity going on. It was she who told me about Ponce Enrile's break with Marcos. So pinadala ko si Lea across the street. And sabi niya talagang walang tao ron, Shortly after that, I got another call. This time from Betty Go Belmonte. She was asking where Christian was and said, I must reach him. And Joe Concepcion, ayan ang dalawang, Christian was Secretary General of NAMFREL, Joe Concepcion was the chairman. And they must go over to Cardinal Sin at the Archbishop's Palace and tell the people to go to EDSA, in front of Camps Crame and Aguinaldo. Kasi nakausap niya yata si Eddie Ramos, and we belong to the same church noon, and he was joining Enrile's group. Apparently, ang plano nila is the people would be protecting the military, yung military na nag-rebel. So galvanized, I sent Leah and Tony and Javi to where Christian and Joe were, and they brought the two to Cardinal Sin. Monsignor Sok was with him, was the only one with the Cardinal at the time. The Cardinal asked Christian to draft his message. He would be on Radio Veritas at 8 p.m. Tapos pumunta ako sa mga anak ko, nasa simbahan sila, and I was going to EDSA and Camp Aguinaldo. They refused ba naman to be left behind kasi lahat sila volunteer ng NAMFREL. We went in different cars, and the car I was in was the last to be allowed inside the Camp Aguinaldo before they closed it. So my children were left outside. Wala akong magawa. We went to Ponce Enrile's office. Naku, the lights of the building were so dark. I mean, the lights were out actually because they were afraid of being bombed. That was how insecure they were. And I saw the fellows who were later defined to me, si mga gringo onasan, they looked very insecure. Nako, sa opisina ni Ponce Enrile, may nag-iiyakan, etc. And Mr. Ponce Enrile was really, I thought he was gray in the face. And that's how I joined the EDSA revolt. So you must understand, mga anak, it did not take place in a vacuum. The people, we were primed for it. We were ready for boycott and civil disobedience, etc. by the events of the recent and the distant past. So when I went home around midnight, EDSA was overflowing midnight, and that was one radio station. But everybody was tuned to it. The Cardinal had come through, as did Butch Aquino's contingent. And I was in EDSA for the next 3 days. 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th was Cory's swearing in. Pumupunta lang ako sa bahay para makatulog. Different hours of the day. There were highs and lows too in EDSA. It was roller coaster kasi may nagsabi na aalis na si Ramos. Ako, enjoy kami. Tapos hindi pala nag-aalis. And then I watched Cory as she was sworn in as President of the Philippines. Wow, what a moment that was. And that was a really high, naku, nagtagumpay na. And then watched Marcos take his oath for the same position with his family, including his wife, who was governor of Metro Manila, cabinet minister, and his son, who was then governor of Ilocos Norte. Alam niyo, si Marcos tried to the very end, in spite of being sick to death, to keep his hold over the Filipino people. And the people were having none of it. So I asked myself, why think of the people power revolt that happened 36 years ago? Anong importansya niyan ngayon? Kasi mga anak, because recent events have given me a sense of déjà vu. We revolted against Marcos then. Are we going to allow his son to be president now? Diyos ko po. They are made of the same cloth. Why did we revolt against Marcos? Because he led the country for 20 years and brought it down to its knees with a collapsed economy, inflation rates at 50%. Foreign debt was close to 100% of GDP. Ngayon, 60% na. Natatakot na ang mga tao. Noon, 100% of GDP na. And what we found later to be a very serious poverty problem. After all that, I mean, he failed dismally. After all that, he still wanted to hold on to power, keeping from his people the fact that he was sick, almost to death. He tried to steal the 1986 elections, disregarding the will of the people. At dyan kami, ayaw magpa. The people refused to be coerced. Now, his son wants to lead the Philippines and tells us that those were the golden years. Diyos ko po. If that were true, why was there a revolt? Why were there so many demonstrations, etc.? A revolt. The only golden years were for his family and their cronies. And maybe, alam niyo, si Mrs. Marcos told me that when she was newly married to Mr. Marcos, she went down to the basement of their house and she saw 7,000 tons of gold in the basement of their house. Ayun siguro yung golden years nila. That's 7 million kilos of gold in the basement. In 1986, si Cory ran against Cory Aquino, widow of a senator of the Republic who was assassinated, if not at his orders, at the orders of those very close to him. Marcos brought out the worst in the Filipino with his lies, with his cheating, with his stealing, with his world-class corruption, his human rights violation, his rule of law, rule by law, and abuse of it. Does that sound familiar? In contrast, EDSA and the widow brought out the best in the Filipino. Sharing, caring, sacrificing for the common good, uniting. Now, the son wants to follow his father's footsteps. But now also, thank God, we have another widow, supremely qualified for the presidency to bring out the best in us. Baka naman may diferensya between the father and son. Alam nyo, kita ko lang, where Marcos Sr. was a bar top-notcher, and Marcos Jr. is a college dropout and fails to admit it. Where Marcos Sr. was acknowledged as highly intelligent, Marcos Jr. failed to pass his qualifying exams at Oxford University and also failed in the Wharton School. That's the only difference. I have one last thought, mga kapus, mga anak. I have one last thought, and that is about the widows. Si Cory was marangal, matapat, matapang, and makabayan. So is Lenny. The closest that the Marcoses can get to those four qualities is that their surname starts with the same two letters. And that is EDSA on my mind. We toppled him. We do not want any of his kind back.